So again, I'm Charles Sallee. I'm the Deputy Director at our Legislative Finance Committee. And as many of you know, the LFC has a couple of main responsibilities. The first one is to make a budget recommendation to the full legislature for all of state government, higher education, and public schools, and that includes state funding for these types of programs. We also have a team of economists that work with the executive branch to predict how much revenue the state's going to have the next fiscal year, which starts the budget process. We also have a team of program evaluators that go out and do the in-depth accountability work for the committee to say, are the investments that you're making actually working and achieving the results that you want? And so we've got a team of evaluators and budget analysts that really work under a framework of what we call legislating for results to try to help the committee get as much good information as they can to help them with their decision-making process. That includes cost-benefit analysis through our work with Gary's shop. It includes our own program evaluation work. It includes regular good old policy analysis, budget analysis, and basic research about what works and what doesn't, and government accountability. We use a couple of other different tools to do that. The committee gets regular report cards from our major agencies on how much they're spending and what they're accomplishing in terms of big outcomes. We produce consumer report type issues that Gary talked about when it comes to this type of cost-benefit analysis. We've done that in the area of adult corrections, child welfare, behavioral health, early childhood education and care. And really that process has allowed us to go out to the agencies and say, we give you a pretty big block grant with lots of flexibility on how you want to spend it. How are you spending it relative to what the research says should work, or maybe there's some research that says interventions don't work, or that it's mixed. How much are you spending on those types of programs and be able to categorize it? And as Gary said, government doesn't have a great handle on what it's spending all of its money on. When we looked at how much we were spending on evidence-based practices in the area of adult behavioral health care, we could only identify between about 7 to 9% of the $500 million we were spending was going towards things that the research suggested would work. Does that mean that we're not spending other money on things that work? Maybe not. It could be just that we're not collecting enough data and information on it. But we certainly aren't getting the outcomes that we want when it comes to behavioral health and some other kinds of things. And so that serves as an opportunity for the legislature and the committee and the executive agency to redouble our efforts to say, how can we continue to do better? So these things, the report cards, our consumer reports, our program evaluations where we go out and do the in-depth work, serve as essentially red flag kinds of things, or green flag. Maybe if we find things that are working working really well and should have a greater investment in it. So it aids in that decision making for the committee, the full legislature, and the executive branch. A good example of that is where we went out and we evaluated our investments in child care assistance. That's our biggest early childhood program in the state. It's about a $100 million program. Serves on average between 17 to 20,000 kids a month. And our state pre-K program to see which one was giving us better outcomes in terms of school preparedness. Are those the only outcomes that those programs produce? No, but those were central to the questions that the committee, what it answered. And what we found was that our investments in pre-K, even though it was a half-day pre-K program with various quality around the state, were producing good outcomes compared to kids who didn't participate in it at kindergarten and lasting all the way through third grade. It's cost beneficial. It's worth the investment. It's supported by other national research that was out there. Our child care assistance program, even though we had been about 15 years in the making of investing in quality initiatives, was not giving us those kinds of outcomes. And it's given the opportunity for the department to go back and figure out how to retool that particular program, boost the quality to try to get some of the same good outcomes that we're getting from our pre-K. What did the legislature do with that information? It's radically ramped up investments in pre-K, where we've essentially saturated the market in New Mexico. About 70 to 90% of low-income kids have access to pre-K program, Head Start, or some of the higher quality child care assistance programs in the state. The legislature's appropriated almost $60 million for that program now. We're expanding it into full-day pre-K and looking at how to expand it further into 3-year-olds. So that's how different pieces of information can come and help inform decision-making and hopefully longer-term outcomes at the end of the day. I would say that in this particular arena, we've not done an assessment of this program or what's being done. In our adult corrections inventory, where we're going out to our work with the prison system and community corrections to say, how are you spending your money relative to our list of programs that research show work? It came up, the Batterer's intervention programs. They're not run through the corrections department, so we didn't have any information on the number of participants, what kinds of outcomes we may be getting locally. But we knew based on the research through our data set that we got from Hugh that there was something that we needed to take a closer look at. And based on our own New Mexico specific population data and that research, if that was holding true in New Mexico, which we don't know that it is or isn't, it wasn't a positive return on investment. And folks should investigate that and understand what's going on the ground in New Mexico and how what we're doing is either working well, like we found with our pre-K program, or could be improved, and how do you retool that? So out of that came some conversations with the coalition and the memorial that ended up passed to help form this task force. And I'd encourage the group to use this as an opportunity now that you've got the attention of policymakers and what really doesn't get enough attention in front of the legislature. I mean, this is the front lines of our fight against child abuse and neglect, family violence. It's a huge issue for children in our state with the adverse childhood experiences that it causes and the long-term damage that we know that can do to kids who live in very toxic, stressful environments. And you're at the front lines of trying to ameliorate those and try to help families in New Mexico lead more stable and productive lives. So I would encourage you as you go into your next meeting to really do a good job with your report of framing the scope of the challenge that we're facing in New Mexico, this particular issue. We can help you do that. But really, how prevalent is it? What does some of the research say about the costs associated with this particular issue? How many people are going through the program? Obviously the basic description, of the requirements under the statute and the regulations. How many people are being served? What programs are out there? Where are those programs? Just as importantly, of what we know about different program models or program practices, what are each of the programs that we have in New Mexico doing? Do we even know that? Can we say, there's a lot of debate today about Duluth. My question all along this summer has been, well, are we even doing that in New Mexico? Are we even doing that to fidelity? Is it widespread, or are we kind of got a lot of homegrown approaches that are a mix of cognitive behavioral kinds of treatment, and maybe we like this, maybe we like that. All of it can fit underneath CYFD's program standards. We don't know, and I haven't heard answers to that in participating with this, and I think that will be an important component to wrap up the work of this group. Obviously, there's not a lot of evidence of what the alternative is to the research that Washington and others have done. There's not overwhelming evidence that wasn't included in the meta-analysis that showed these interventions, the way that they're constructed, are getting outcomes that folks want. I haven't heard that today. And so rather than focusing on dueling methodologies, I think we should probably focus on how do we create a New Mexico model and then test to see if what we're doing works for our particular communities in the state moving forward, using the best information that we have available from a multitude of sources about what we think is likely to lead to better outcomes. What other kinds of barriers does the system experience right now, and where do we think we can improve with our practitioners informing that discussion. You all are on the front lines of that. We've got judges here, we've got program administrators, I'm sure counselors and people that are doing all of these things. So all of that will be really important to help inform the discussion, because when we started this, the Secretary of CYFD was very clear. She wanted actionable recommendations that would help the department improve the programs. And I think the legislature would expect that as well as any other policy recommendations that they need to consider, whether financial or statutorily. I haven't heard anything magic about 52 weeks. Is that something that should be revisited? I mean, even if you're a believer in the Duluth to Fidelity, that's not what Duluth to Fidelity does, the best I can tell. So those are things that I would encourage the group to continue to work on. We'll be a resource and be helpful and supportive in that endeavor. And thank you for having us here today. And thank you for all you do, more importantly.
Well, so I've been really buoyed by the conversations today. I mean, it's hard to find people to do this work. I mean, I think it is for 10 to 15 bucks an hour if people show up. And to go through all the training and et cetera. And the idea that there may be results from it, and we don't know, and that's what I wanted to ask. So when you say like we need to kind of figure it out here, we don't know if it's working or not working, or compare programs and such. I mean, that is I'm saying people are getting paid 10 to 15 bucks an hour. They're not like poised to do research studies on their people. You know what I mean?
And this group wouldn't be the one to do the research of whether it works or not.
Yeah.
It could be that you have a recommendation for CYFD to work with potentially external funders to help set up a framework to collect data and other information, if they're not already collecting it, to be able to help answer some of these questions. If CYFD is able to partner with the Administrative Office of the Courts and the Corrections Department to collect some of the data on rearrest, on recidivism, those other kinds of things that they don't have now, that could be something that you could recommend the department work with those other agencies to do, and start tracking the results of your program participants. What percentage of your program participants actually complete the program? There's research that people feel very strongly about, that if they complete it, you got better outcomes. Well, is it 10% completing it, or is it 50%? We don't know, but you got to look at those kinds of things. So those would be kind of recommendations coming out of it, where you don't have to answer the direct research question yourself.
Right, well, and so I guess the broader question is, with the recommendations, obviously we'd love to recommend quadrupling the amount of money available for these programs, but it sounds like that's not the intent. So how do we get at some of these things?
Well, I think in terms of presenting the scope of the problem helps better position you for that ask, in terms of that we're woefully underfunded because of X, Y, and Z. But then also demonstrating a commitment to improving and continuous quality improvement and accountability further helps you make your case. When agencies come in and say, just give us this money because it's a good cause, versus somebody else comes in and says, we need this money to do X, Y, and Z. Here's what we expect the outcomes to be. Here are the long-term benefits that we expect you to get down the road. You're much better positioned to have that funded than the other anecdotal stuff. The committee's very invested in data and results.
When I have a list of things I have to do, I am one of those people who picks the easiest things off the list first, so that I can cross some things off my list and show I did something. Well, that's not what this is. This is a hard problem, and this is going to be hard to show, and in my opinion, and we're going to have trouble with this. And I hope that if this study is done, it's not just done on Batterer's intervention programs, but it's done on this system. Because, when you talk about completing 52 weeks, I'm telling you, it's like pulling teeth to get people through 52 weeks, because They
And-
don't come.
Right.
We send something back and we say they're not showing up, and nothing happens. So if nothing happens, they don't get back to us for 4 months, then, is that the fault of the program?
Well, I
I think it's the fault of the
No, I think
system.
that's something to consider, but I think it's also something as you're looking at the research. Did you see any strong support for 52 weeks as a good amount of time? I haven't seen anything to date saying that long of an expectation to participate in treatment is a good thing. And even the proponents of the Duluth model by design don't ask for 52 weeks.
Yeah,
I think
Duluth
it's more
is
like
26.
26. And then you saw differences in some of the research between the 26 and the 8. That 8 might be too short. There's a lot of noise in that data, but it told you something, and you can use it. So if you've got low completion rates, that could be one of the reasons, not only just because of compliance issues with working with other people, but there's no basis for, we're expecting people to participate in a program for a whole year. Right.
And I would encourage you to just really sort of look at this, as an opportunity to step back and say, okay, one of the big problems we have is that half people don't complete the program. Is there something that can be done about that? Because regardless, even if this turned 95% of people's lives around and half the people didn't complete it, then it's not going to be as effective as potentially could be if there are specific actions that could be redesigned in the system to get people into the program and keep them there.
So can I, I have to raise my hand. Yes? You may speak now. Charles asked me, I don't know, how long have we been talking about this? A year?
Yeah, about a year and a half.
So the first meeting I had with him, he said, so do batterer intervention programs work in New Mexico? Which is a legitimate question. And I said, I don't think we have any idea, right? And I think that's still true. And it makes me think, I'm sorry, I have to tell a brief dog story, be very quick. So I have a dog who's enormous. He's very overweight. So I took him to the vet, and they said, you got to put him on this weight management food. So I said, okay. So I put him on it, and I fed him what it said I was supposed to feed him, and he didn't lose weight. In fact, he gained a little weight. So I went back to the vet, and I said, he got fatter, not smaller. And they said, well, what are you feeding him? I said, I'm feeding him what it says I should feed him. They said, no. You're supposed to feed him what you want him to be, not what he is. And I went, oh. So I started feeding him what I wanted him to be, and he got smaller. Not a lot smaller, mind you, but smaller. And so it just made me think that, we could right now try to go through and evaluate all of our programs, and it'd be a big sort of mishmash because so many different things are going on. But we could decide where it is we want to be and what we want to do, and kind of as much as possible kind of get together on that, and then we have a basis to evaluate. But right now, we really don't. So any information we get right now is probably not very helpful. That's all I have to say about that. Didn't mean to make everybody be quiet. Oh, okay.
I just really look at it as a collaborative effort. I think this is like a nice starting point. So with all the research and everything that we received, we can start somewhere. And what I love about corrections is we have really good leadership. And with corrections, this is something that we're really used to. We're used to being the underdogs, and nobody likes our work and so forth, and they always point out problems. But I think with our administration and our strategy is reflection, looking back. What do we need to do? Where do we start? Even with our officers and our training, okay, so when we look at offenders and we look at recidivism and failing to report, we have absconders, we have keep picking up new crimes. A lot of it was, well, how are we engaging with them? So it's officers, in our training, we're looking at, okay, how do we engage with our offenders? How do we motivate them to want to report and, to want to abide by programming? And it's more of a, and the way I train my officers, it's more of a, we look at ourselves and it's our responsibility to help engage with that process. And I really look at it too, it's not necessarily, yes, money is an important factor, but we already have a lot of resources and tools and great people in this field. And if we all just kind of, I think, work together and kind of, we have our own little kind of home groups, all really discuss that. We know, I know with corrections what our system failures are. I also know what we can contribute as well. So if we all kind of do that within our own organizations, I think we can really pull together and have something really, really amazing.
Okay. Thank you all very much. We appreciate everyone's participation.